The reason why I think Monday Church is important is because traditional missions that came to Africa were relevant to the context then, which was working with leaders in an agricultural context. And a lot of work went into what it means to be a good farmer and what it means to raise your own crops and take care of your family. But Africa has become rapidly urbanized, and as churches move to urban centers, we are finding a disconnect between what it means to be a Christian on Sunday and how do you translate your faith into a very, very diverse marketplace on Monday. People are challenged, they're told to live the Christian life, but they're not told how. How does this actually work out? Now, the second reason why I feel this course is important is because we in CMS Africa, together with the Disciple Nations Alliance, have been involved the last 15 years working with church leaders, helping them to see the need to be holistic, the need to engage with their cultures. But again, the how bit is very, very critical. What does this now look like for me on Monday? What does it look like for me in my business? What does it look like for me as a government worker and a politician? And we have questions all the time, not on the why, because the why is very clear. Not even on the what is very clear, but the how. And I feel the Monday Church course actually provides a way of thinking that helps people begin to realize just what does it look like to be a Christian on Monday. Most people are aware that they spend a lot of them, an entire part of the week, not in church, not in a church service, not even in a prayer meeting. They spend it with colleagues at work, and there's a disconnect. If this is how I spend my time, does it mean anything to my faith to spend my time as a doctor, as a teacher, as a business person, and I don't seem to be able to make the connection? So I believe the Monday Church is really very critical in helping Christians make that connection with what they do most of their time, most of their life. The church in Africa is growing, it is young. We're a young continent, we're a growing continent, we're a vibrant continent. For many church leaders, they limit what they see as their task or as their mission to planting more churches or seeing the numbers of Christians reached increase. But for many years, the church growth in Africa has not really resulted in any significant change in the way people live or how people's lifestyles or values are changed. And the Monday Church really begins to address what does it mean for us to engage with the Cultural Commission, realizing that numbers are important. Church growth in terms of church planting is significant, but it's not how many churches or how big the churches are, but what kind of churches are we planting? Are they churches that engage with their culture? Are they churches that go back to seeing the story in the scripture that begins in Genesis and ends in Revelation, where we're not only given the Great Commission in Matthew, but also the Cultural Commission in Genesis, where as God's people, God restores us back to people who really begin to influence and change our cultures. The reason why many Christians do not find it easy to live out their faith in the public square or in the marketplace is because we have not really given them a framework to think or even to see the significance of not just influencing what they do, but the environment in which they work, influencing the values, the beliefs, and the foundational thoughts of their culture. Most Christians are not even aware that there is a worldview out there that is in conflict with the biblical worldview. And I believe the Monday Church, building on particularly what we've done in CMS Africa as a Vision Conference, gives people a tool or a key to begin to exegete their context and engage with not just acting out their faith, but changing the values of their society around them by impacting the thinking and what underlies the behavior of those that they work with. When I think about the fall and how it has affected our work on the workplace in Africa, is that Corruption is a big factor in most African economies and is accepted as normal. In fact, if one is not corrupt, there seems to be something wrong with you. And I believe that corruption in Africa actually comes out of our worldview of animism or primal worldview, where in order to get anything done from a higher power or a greater power, one has to offer some kind of sacrifice, pay some kind of price. So the way in which we view work is not in terms of productivity, in terms of how much you accomplish, but in terms of power and in terms of who has more power to accomplish, to affect results than the other. The big chief syndrome is very, very big in Africa. And the way you approach the big chief is with a gift. So you come to a typical African context and you expect to see productivity, but it boils down to not what you know or what you do, but who you know and how you relate to who you know. And I believe it comes back from our worldview where sacrifice is very much part of how we engage with the greater powers. So I think we in Africa need to really examine why it is that in most African contexts, our productivity, our view of work is very, very negative. We try and work as little as possible or try and get as much as possible with as little work put in as possible. And some kind of work is even looked down upon. Physical work is looked down upon. One is expected to work less and less with their hands and more their heads, as it were. And so in many parts of Africa, we lack actually skilled artisans. Skilled work is looked down upon. It is underpaid. And so we have an economy in Africa that's actually very much in need of practical, productive workers. And Christians who fill the churches don't see how their work on Monday relates to their worship. And I believe that Monday Church can actually be a way of helping Christians begin to relate their worship and their work together so that they see their work as an act of worship to God and as a way of glorifying God with the outcome of the hours they put into their place of work. When people think about worship and work, first of all, you need to overcome a negative view of work, that work is a curse. So those who work, and particularly because of our heritage of slavery, the slaves were put to work and made to work hardest. People grew up with a desire not to work. So not to work was seen as being in a better position as those who are working. So there's a big need to see our work not as just responding to some slave master, fulfilling somebody else's goals and objectives, but being part of shaping creation's beauty, shaping creation's values, and taking care of God's creations as stewards. So work was seen as a negative part, and avoidance of work was seen as a goal of life, whether it's through corruption or through just not doing any work. So there needs to be a new understanding of what of the theology of work, what work means in God's economy. I mean, my mother's worldview was when you went to school and you were late in class, you were punished to go and dig up the garden. That was a punishment. So in terms of dig up the garden, it's punishment because the real educated people don't do the garden work, they do the book work. So work was made to be lesser. The physical work was seen as lesser, and the more thinking work was seen as better. But also because of the slave master, not just a slavery move, but that's kind of the master-slave culture we have. The lesser do all the work, and the greater do no work, physically. So it's seen more of a curse, of a burden. Yep. I think the aha moment for me particularly was the fact that work was given to man before the fall. For most people think that work came as a result of the fall. Now work was made harder and more difficult, but God gave mankind the task to develop the earth before the fall. And in most people's minds, it's the fall that led us to work. You know, as opposed to work was given to us before the fall, and the fall made work and childbearing, harder. One critical dynamic that I believe the Monday Church needs to address is how the church sees its mission and its relationship to its members. There has been an understanding of mission or church work as that which the pastor does or the missionary does. It is a specialized work for some who have gone through specialized training and given specialized licenses to do this work, which is primarily on a Sunday. Now, church leaders of that paradigm then view the work as complete when they come out of a church building and they don't see how their work engages with the society or how it relates to society. But I believe that one key thing for Monday Church is to really go back to the book of Ephesians, which is a book that talks about the church and then understanding the roles of the various leaders within the church, whether it's the apostles or the prophets or the evangelists or the pastor teacher, to equip the saints for works of service. A typical understanding of works of service, again, tends to be limited to what happens within the church context, the church building. But I believe that as we understand the cultural commission and understand that the pastor's role is to equip the saints for works of service, and these works of service include taking care of God's creation and advancing His kingdom wherever God has placed them, it then changes the focus of not how full are our churches or how many members come to a church or how many meetings do we have in a church, but how effective are our church members when they go out there to their families, when they go out there to the marketplace. Do they make a difference? Are they truly the salt of the earth and the light of the world? It's interesting that Jesus uses the both earth and world, two different words. The earth is actually a physical, material earth, where we plant crops. And the world is a world system and its structures. Do Christians actually go there and make an influence? And I believe that this would really free up pastors to evaluate the success, not in terms of numbers or attendance, but in terms of influence and impact. This does also result in people being drawn to Christ, because for the non-Christian, they begin to see becoming a Christian more than just attending a building or going to a set of meetings. One believer that came from actually a Muslim background told me that before I became a Christian, I had community. Now I have meetings. So what does it mean like to be a community of Christians out there in the marketplace? We've moved from being a community of people who live under Christ's authority to people who just have regular meetings. And the meetings seem to take us away from our engagement with the world rather than equipping us to engage with the world in ways that transform the world. What challenges do Christians face when trying to live out their faith through their work? A friend of mine was very disappointed when he became a Christian during a time of revival. And he observed that the more people filled the churches, the more corruption and corrupt the society became. And actually the economy of that particular country actually collapsed. And he wanted to assume that the more people filled churches, the better the economy would be for that country. And I think part of the challenge there has been that for many Christians, they limit their involvement in their workplace or in influencing their cultures or their industries to having prayer meetings at their place of work, or having fellowships at their place of work, or even trying to witness or lead people to Christ in their place of work, which is important. But they fail to understand how the entire industry and the values and the beliefs of that industry either align or don't align to kingdom values. And the Monday Church, I think, is an opportunity for Christians to not just to try and do Christian activities at their place of work rather than at church, but to look for ways of understanding how kingdom values are either underpinned or undermined by the culture of the places of work. And in that context, they need to then develop ways of counteracting those values. I'll give you one example. My country, Kenya, one of our thought leaders, our first president, Jomo Kenyatta, made a public statement 5 years after independence and said it is okay to steal so long as you don't get caught. And today, 50 years later after independence, what people decry is not being caught, is not corruption, but being caught being corrupt. So people almost set their goal and objectives of going to public office to steal. That becomes one of the clear goals and measurable things. How much have I stolen? And the thing that they need to realize is that it is not the being caught that's wrong, it is the stealing that's wrong. And you just need to change that narrative and go back to a biblical narrative that says, you shall not steal, period, not the modification. So in each industry, there are different kinds of lies and values like that that drive how the entire industry works. Now, globally, you look at the pharmaceutical industry, or you look at the media, mass media, or you look at the education sector, and God has placed Christians in those sectors in each culture, but we seldom reflect on what values drive those sectors. And I believe Christians need to step back and reflect more with an understanding of kingdom values and being able to really reflect on how do the everyday opportunities engage and relate to kingdom values. But more than that, what can they do to change the narrative, to change the story, to change the values? Now, we also use as Christians to what I call short-term results or quick wins. Now, in transforming cultures, that may not necessarily be realistic. It may take us a number of years to change cultures. One typical example all of us go back to is William Wilberforce and the slave trade. It took him about 33 years to change that, which gives me a perspective. I could go into an industry, I could go to my place of work and realize that things need to be changed, but realize that it may take a number of years of sustained, intentional, collaborative engagement with the context to see some results. So Christians need to have a long-term view, but need to have a biblical mindset to see their culture and exegete their culture in the places of work.